Welcome to Blockchain 2025. We explore how blockchain technology will affect major industries in the future.
Each episode dissects one industry, how it currently works, why blockchain can disrupt it, and some blockchain projects trying to be the solution.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
Blockchain 2025 listeners, we have a special episode today. It's just me, Matt Aaron, interviewing one of the foremost experts on blockchain technology in the world, Jared Tate. Jared is the founder and creator of the DigiByte blockchain, which he forked the code of Bitcoin and created his own cryptocurrency and blockchain network. He speaks at top universities, law enforcement, companies, government organizations all around the world, advising them on the power of blockchain technology and cybersecurity. He also has a book coming out called Blockchain 2035. So I had to have him on the show. And I asked him to paint a picture of where does he see the future going forward with blockchain technology? How will it affect end users, consumers, business owners? We also take a look at One Belt, One Road, which is the original Silk Road. Think Marco Polo and the ancient trade routes between Asia and Europe. And it's a $5 trillion project spearheaded by China, the largest infrastructure project in the world, and how they're going to use blockchain. It was a treat to have Jared on the show. Yeah, here it is. Jared Tate, welcome to a special edition of Blockchain 2025.
Thanks for having me on.
And Jared, I have to say, it's quite the coincidence that you have a book coming out called Blockchain 2035.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting when I heard the name Blockchain 25.
Yeah, we'll see. If we're around 7 years from now, we'll have to go over all the copyright and trademark stuff. But in all seriousness, man, thanks so much for coming on the show. You've been in the crypto community for a long time, and I think you have the ability to bridge the gap of some people are great speaking technical, and then some people are great talking about the future on a non-technical side. I think you possess both qualities.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll link to your speech at the Texas Bitcoin conference. In each episode of Blockchain 2025, we usually cover an industry, but I want to make this a special bonus app for listeners and just get your take, Jared, on the future. What will blockchain be like in 2035 in the future? And paint the picture using real world examples. And I wanted to start off with a project that I would guess 90% of Americans and Europeans don't even know about. Those are the majority of our listeners. That's why I mentioned it. And it's called One Belt, One Road. Tell us about, explain that to people that haven't heard of that.
Well, so One Belt, One Road is an initiative that has been undertaken for the last few years by the Chinese government to recreate the old ancient maritime overland Silk Roads.
Sorry, I got to interrupt here because we've covered this in the podcast before. Not to be confused with Ross Ulbricht's Silk Road, which, was one of the springboards for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The original Silk Road, but keep going.
Correct. Yeah. So we're talking about the ancient trading routes that extended from southern China in the Shenzhen, Shanghai area, overland all the way through the Eurasian mountains into Europe, as well as the maritime route, which extends through several ports all the way back into Europe. So this existed at the height of, a few of the Chinese dynasties. And there's an effort to basically recreate this. So the Chinese government is creating a tremendous amount of infrastructure in countries along this route. So they're building new ports, building new support infrastructure, building new railways. And it's pretty much like we were talking about earlier, the largest construction project ever taken in human history. And yet we hardly hear about this at all in the United States. So one of the things I learned, I actually lived in southern China the last 4.5 years before I moved back to the US last fall. And at several of the events I would go to that were blockchain related, whether it was in Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong, the one thing they all had in common is that they wanted to link blockchain technology and use that as the web or fabric, if you will, between all these different ports and cities and different spots to recreate this new One Belt and One Road.
Right on. Yeah. And I've seen certain plans from the project, one being a high-speed train from Pakistan to China, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's a serious infrastructure project. And that's just one example of what they're trying to do. I mean, pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting. In 2016, I had the privilege to travel down to South Africa to speak at a blockchain conference there. And it amazed me when I got off the airport in Johannesburg, there was just a giant mural of China Construction Bank taking up the entire internal wall of the airport. And, that flight coming from Hong Kong, you saw these workers that are coming to start building this infrastructure. And to me, that was very apparent that this is real and it's happening all the way up the coast of Africa into the Middle East. It's all being, and where blockchain comes into all this is what better way to conduct payments, to secure trade shipments, to basically, there's this concept that has been put forward, especially in Hong Kong, where a lot of these port cities become known as what they call oracles, or basically the gatekeepers to a blockchain that links all this trading infrastructure together. So it's something I don't see policymakers in the United States really paying much attention to at all.
Okay. And I want you to define, for a non-technical person, let's just say they're just learning about blockchain, how would you define an oracle?
Well, just if we could take one step back here, just to kind of present how I view blockchain technology.
Sure.
The first thing I want to say to people is not all blockchains are the same. But we could probably talk more about that later. But to me, when I hear blockchain technology, I think of a decentralized, secure network that has the ability to fix 90 to 95% of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities we have in the internet today. And I can expand further on that. And that's kind of the gist of this book that I'm writing, Blockchain 2035, is that by the year 2035, a lot of the applications we'll end up using that use blockchain, we won't really know it's blockchain, but it'll be helping in the cybersecurity realm in a number of ways. And it's also, I should throw in there, the other reason I chose 2035 is that's the year that the last DigiByte will be minted. So that was kind of the double meaning behind the book. But in terms of an oracle, so we've pretty well proven, like in the case of what I worked on in Hong Kong with DigiSign and securing international trade shipments, you can secure anything in the blockchain. But how do you validate and confirm the information that is put into the blockchain? You still have to have some sort of trusted source that does that. So this idea of an oracle is you'll have this local environment jurisdiction that then becomes a trusted oracle or authorizer for information, for records that are uploaded to a worldwide decentralized blockchain. So as the network and the trade route expands, you'll have different oracles that can become the, trusted gatekeepers for information that's uploaded to a trade-based blockchain.
Okay, so the oracle, we'll say, in South Africa, right? Maybe in Cape Town. Would this be an office, or would this be a network that connects to the blockchain and has proven trust, meaning there's no corruption there?
Well, so in the case of what they're trying to do in Hong Kong, it would be existing government bodies that already maintain import and export documents. So it's just kind of an evolution of their internal operations, as well as still giving, some sort of validation or authority to local institutions there. So it's kind of like a merger of the two. But eventually, I would see it being almost a truly decentralized system.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of, I think, the vision that we're all hoping for.
Gotcha. But these are some, just like, centralized exchanges like Coinbase for buying cryptocurrency are an intermediary step, right, in adoption. So this office, I really want to paint the picture here. So this office, let's just say in Cape Town, they would, instead of, let's just say, having databases and their own servers, they would store this information for import and export documents on a blockchain, and they would interact with the blockchain. Walk me through using blockchain technology, one belt, one road. Let's say we're going to send a container of some type of agricultural product, right? Let's just say a container of fruit from like dried baobab fruit from South Africa, through one belt, one road. It'll go up a high-speed train to North Africa and then take a boat up to the port of Shenzhen. How would blockchain technology interact along the way?
So, as I kind of visualize it, every point along that route, when it was scanned in, it's like, hey, it's midway up its journey from Cape Town. It gets scanned. That oracle or that local city basically puts their stamp on it. That record's put into the blockchain. So that way the people in Shenzhen can see, oh, here's where it's at. We know for sure because this is the cryptographic blockchain identity from this city. We also know it was originated and actually shipped because it's timestamped. And here's the validation from the cryptographic blockchain identity from the people in Cape Town. And then finally, when it arrives, you can validate these documents when it's proven in Shenzhen. Now, how this actually works, I see it as being a merger of IoT devices and sensors, blockchain technology, and AI. That's how I visualize the system working at the very end, because you need to validate the data you're getting. So one of the problems that we're finding with artificial intelligence is if you just throw any random data at it, you could throw bad data at it. You could throw corrupt data at it. You need to validate the data that's actually being analyzed by artificial intelligence. Now, once you have that step, you need some sort of physical proximity or sensor that can detect, hey, this train just arrived, or the shipment actually left, or there's a GPS signal that's attached to the shipping container that says this is really where it is. That information is then validated by AI and then also, proven and time-stamped in a blockchain. So that's how I see those three things working together for that sort of application.
So, I work in the produce business, so I've seen firsthand how blockchain can affect it. Let me give you my version of that and just see how this sounds. So let's just say we're going to send some food, right? Something that's perishable. And I'd say IoT, that probably relates to AI, Internet of Things, meaning, smart devices. So I think of the idea of, you have to, for perishable food, it's very important that what the exporter says or the grower is correct, right? So we could have a smart contract, meaning we'll say a digital contract for this. Let's say I have a buyer in China. He wants, a full container of fruit from South Africa. And we could set parameters, meaning that if it's in X condition, meaning let's just say the temperature, humidity, other things that can prove that the fruit is in good condition are met. And that, all these points, the train out of North Africa arrives at this time, et cetera, all these conditions are met, which you talked about using AI and proving that as soon as the container, like the location, right, gets to, let's say, the final warehouse of the buyer, that automatically sends a payment back to the company in South Africa. And you mentioned documentation as well. There's all these quality control certifications. How do you know if the documents are valid, right? There's a big problem with falsification of documents, but the blockchain would save so much time and money there because you could always verify on the blockchain their quality control, making sure that the moisture of the fruit is at a certain level. Did they, pest control, water, all of that could be done on the blockchain eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things with the use case we worked on with DigiByte is we found is, sure, you can take those certification documents, those airway bills of lading, purchase orders, etc. But how do you actually know who at the end of the day is the one that's filling those out? Right. And that goes back to that Oracle concept. You need to trust the party, or at least know who the party is that's actually the final individual last mile actually signing those documents. Right. And that's where establishing a blockchain identity that can be proven and linked back to a set of private keys that that this individual owns. Doesn't have to be tied to your wallet. A lot of people get confused with that. It can just be completely for the purpose of signing documents. That's what we did with DigiByte. That's actually what we're doing with our DigiID stuff that we're rolling out now into our mobile wallets and other stuff. You can just choose a random address. You don't want to do the same one that you handle your funds with. But then you have the ability to authenticate from everything from signing a document to even logging into a website and replacing passwords and two-factor authentication. So going back to this example about this container. So if you know that the final person that actually closed the door on the container, who they are and they actually agreed to it. So if something happens and some sort of funny business went down, exactly where to look, right? And there's some sort of recourse. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on. Smart contracts that can be tied in with some of the sensors. So if all of a sudden, for some reason, there was a power outage or a failure, and all this produce spoiled, halfway along the train journey, obviously there's no point in that container going any further because the damage has been done.
And Jared, I can tell you another nightmare for people that work in produce and probably all of international trade, right, is insurance claims. Proving that the fault is with, let's say, the cargo company. Like, let's say the cargo warehouse in North Africa where they lost power and then because of the heat, the chocolate melted or the fruit went bad. Being able to prove that would save so much time and money and gray hairs when you're negotiating with it, because then it would be, hey, no, this is a fact that it happened at X point along the supply chain. I mean, I think that's so fascinating. And I think it's very forward thinking of the One Belt, One Road initiative to integrate blockchain technology, it looks like from the onset. So I would definitely consider you an expert, one of the world's leading experts on blockchain technology. So we mentioned the trade One Belt, One Road. What are some other interesting examples, real world examples in the future that are going to happen in the next 5 to 15 years?
Well, one of the things that I'm most passionate about that I believe absolutely needs to help is with healthcare. Today in the United States, our healthcare system is a disaster, to say the least. I mean, I myself, I missed the enrollment period after spending almost 5 years overseas. I came back in, and I actually don't even have health insurance right now. I spent 2 weeks trying to get it, and they're like, sorry, you missed the enrollment deadline. There's nothing we can do, yada, yada, yada. And then what I found out is even if I got insurance here in Texas, and I travel often, I was just speaking at MIT and Harvard a week and a half ago, traveling to California for meetings out there, going back to see my parents in Idaho. Even if I got insurance here in the United States, in Texas, I would only be covered in Texas. I wouldn't be covered in any of these other places. Yet it's just ridiculously expensive. But more importantly, when I go to a doctor, and even something as simple as just, a minor checkup or something, why do 8 different parties in some cases have to have access to all my private data? And why does it have to be stored in a number of different locations insecurely? So what I visualize with blockchain technology is, imagine if you had a wallet, for a simple explanation, you had a wallet, a crypto wallet, yet you didn't really store cryptocurrency in it. And it's a hardware device, something say like a Trezor or a Ledger Nano. But instead of containing the keys, it actually contained your cryptographic medical records. And those medical records, in order for somebody to access them, you had to give them permission, right? Now, let's say if something happened to you, well, obviously you could do a multi-sig set of medical records. So basically your medical records, in order for somebody to access them, you have to give them permission. You have to give them the key. It's like a house key, right? So what multi-sig is, it's like, okay, imagine your house. So if you're married, your spouse has a key. If you have children, your children have a key.
Right.
Maybe your lawyer has a key. Maybe your parents have a key. And that's kind of what multi-sig is. There's multiple people have keys. And then in some cases, you can do what we often refer to as multi-sig, is where if you have 3 or 4 people that have a key to your house,
Gotcha.
You require 2 of them use their keys simultaneously. So that way, if something happens to you, your family or your trusted lawyer or whoever can actually give access. But the most important part is you're the one that controls your data. You're the one that controls your privacy. And since it's secured in one container, if you will, or one wallet, you don't have to worry about these massive data breaches. So if your medical records provider, the insurer, or the doctor's office gets breached, because, let's be honest, a lot of these doctors' offices, cybersecurity is not their number one priority. It's pretty wild, some of the stuff you see and how data is kept.
Yeah. So Jared, I got to share something here. There's a link to it. The Onion, the parody newspaper in the United States, they have this really funny article about how Facebook sets their policy for medical records. And it's a quote, obviously a false quote from Mark Zuckerberg saying, rest assured, your medical information is between you, your doctor, and Facebook.
Yeah. And also not just in terms of security, in terms of cybersecurity, obviously this is a much more secure way, but also in terms of efficiency. I mean, one of the things I tell people or when I advise startups is anywhere you can see the ability to eliminate, middlemen or any sort of middle industry that's really not necessary and is very inefficient, there's huge opportunity. And part of the reason that the healthcare costs are just so astronomical in the United States is you have so many third parties, acting as intermediaries that don't really need to be there, that can be disintermediated by blockchain technology. So I often think if you go from whether it's trading and logistics to the legal profession to healthcare, and if you calculate all the inefficiency and wasted human energy, effort, and time that goes into these intermediary businesses, and if we were to take that and free that up, where would we be as a species in 50 years?
That's an interesting way to think about just the lost man hours, man and women hours in the world that are spent. And every industry, the more you understand, the more time wasters, the more middlemen you see. I've seen this in the produce business, as I mentioned, just verifying documents and paying, $60 for an airway bill, which is just the official shipping document. And then healthcare, you have the insurance brokers. You may not necessarily need the insurance brokers. And so many of them still operate with fax machines. I could go on and on there. So you mentioned identity and the importance of data breaches and cybersecurity. Breaches in cybersecurity cost so much time and money worldwide every year, and it's only going to increase. Another thing that I think that's interesting there with medical records is insurance claims, right? That's a huge industry where blockchain could really help in improving, making sure that you get paid. If you have health insurance, a lot of people are worried sometimes. They're like, are they going to find a reason to not reimburse me for this surgery I had?
Yeah, absolutely. Insurance is another area that can definitely be improved, by blockchain technology. The other area that I really think could use blockchain technology is obviously legal. We talk about smart contracts all the time. I think that confuses people a lot. But for sure, the inefficiencies, once again, just like we were talking about, whether it was trade and logistics, whether it's healthcare, there's a tremendous amount of inefficiencies in the legal system that we have today. And then also, more importantly, and this kind of ties back into the international.
And sorry, Jared, I want you to give us some examples of the inefficiencies in the legal system that could be solved by blockchain.
Well, I think that goes back to records, right? A lot of times you'll see, a requirement that something be notarized for it to be deemed official.
Right.
Well, to me, that's almost the first use case for a blockchain. And I also want to point one thing out here. One of my criticisms of the way that they're attempting to implement One Belt, One Road is with a private, centrally controlled blockchain, right? I don't think that's ever going to work on an international basis. And that's where I'm a huge proponent of public, decentralized blockchains that are international, that have been open source. And, in my mind, there's really only a handful out there that fit that bill, that can actually be used for this sort of application. So I just wanted to clarify that, going back to my previous statement, not all blockchains are the same.
Sure. And I want to dive into that. So I think I've had it explained to me just kind of public blockchains versus private blockchains. It's like comparing the internet versus the intranet. There's definitely uses for intranet, but the impact on the world is a fraction of what the internet has done.
Right.
And so all public blockchains, they have to be powered by a cryptocurrency. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to public versus private, I see a huge use case for private blockchains being anchored into public blockchains and leveraging the security of public chains. But yeah, as I describe a public UTXO blockchain, and when I say UTXO, I'm specifically referring to Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, DigiByte, maybe Vertcoin. To me, those are kind of like the pillar that has had the most backbone and development and proven battle-hardened existence over the last, Bitcoin came about almost 10 years ago now. I mean, what are we, 9 years now? So for an application like trade or shipping and logistics, you need that very transparent public blockchain. And so a lot of these other projects don't even come close to really kind of fitting that bill, right? But how I describe them is you have three layers. It's like a cake. You have this bottom layer. At the bottom layer, it's effectively a communications protocol. That's one of the most fascinating things that I feel is really underappreciated about Bitcoin and the UTXO, P2P model is it is a very efficient communications mechanism in a decentralized way. Now, once you have that, you need to incentivize people to actually run that. And that's where the cryptocurrency comes in, right? Whether it's Bitcoins, Bcash, DigiByte, et cetera. Once you have that and those two things, then you can start building applications on top of that. And you can also start anchoring in private blockchains on top of that. And so that's really, in my mind, the only way that all of this kind of comes about in the long term.
For sure. And you mentioned cybersecurity. You mentioned the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, Litecoin, DigiByte blockchains. And Jared, you're doing a great job. But another layman terms definition, I think a lot of people don't understand that blockchain gets hacked. The value of the cryptocurrency and the value of its application to everything we've talked about goes down to zero, right? What are the most important factors to look for? Because Ethereum, it came out in 2015. You have to understand the power of the Bitcoin blockchain in terms of security. So explain in layman terms, how you can understand in terms of all public blockchains not being created equal, which blockchains are the most secure.
Well, so to me, the real security of a blockchain comes in its network, right? How many people are actually using it? And more importantly, how many what we call nodes, but essentially a node is nothing more than a server or a computer that's running the full version of the software, like let's say Bitcoin. How many different servers across the planet are actually running that software at any given time? So, at any given time, I think I haven't checked the Bitcoin node count in a while. but it's up there pushing 7 or 8, 10,000. I can't tell you exactly how many nodes we have with DigiByte right now, but I can tell you we've had almost 220,000 downloads of the full client basically in the past 11 or 12 months. So any given time, maybe 5 to 10,000 of them are active. But a lot of these new projects that are coming out are only running on, let's say, 7 servers controlled by the same party, or 12 servers controlled by the same 1 or 2 people. Those aren't blockchain. They're not decentralized. People are claiming that they're blockchains. But if you start building on that type of foundation, you're introducing a tremendous amount of security vulnerabilities to the system and whatever you're building. So to me, obviously you have to have the proven structure of how the blockchain itself works. But then once you have that, you have to make sure it's actually decentralized. So I'm totally for the creation of something called like a decentralization index, where you actually measure how decentralized this blockchain is. And when I think about decentralization of a blockchain, I like to make the comparison back to nature. So if you look throughout nature, there's plenty of examples of the power of decentralization. Like, for instance, take mushrooms. When a mushroom releases its spores, it releases thousands of identical spores that spread, as far and wide as they can. And that's how that plant species survives. Look at our own DNA. We make exact replicas of our own DNA, and we spread that around in a decentralized fashion. And that's how our own species has survived. So you see this throughout human nature, this trend towards decentralization and replication of identical records. Numerous cases you can look at that. And also throughout human history, you can see this wave of centralization and decentralization. And I think we just hit one of the peak centralization, and now we're going to move to a decentralized world.
The internet got more, meaning the internet has become very centralized. You look at Facebook, Google, Amazon, and that's a huge chunk of it right there. Jared, great metaphor, using nature for decentralization. And I'll just add one more example because I want to make sure everyone understands this. A blockchain that's on 10,000 computers in 100 countries is much safer than a blockchain just running on my computer and Jared's computer. If you hack one or both of our computers, it goes down, that's it, right? So very clear metaphor there with nature. Jared, you mentioned in the book, Blockchain 2035, and whenever that's published, we'll make sure to link to it and promote it for you. You mentioned how you're going to explain it towards developers, towards business people, and towards end users. Maybe on a different podcast for developers, but I'd like you to kind of paint the future as a business owner right now. How is it going to affect my life, my company? And then also for end users, for consumers, how is it going to affect them going forward? What benefits and what changes will they see?
Well, going back to like we were talking about earlier, if you happen to be as a business owner or a business person in one of these businesses or industries where you are a middleman or middlewoman, and you can see that there's a high chance that you could be replaced by blockchain technology, AI, and automation with software, I would really start looking at, okay, how can I be at the forefront of this and help bring this into my industry and be on the leading edge instead of the losing end of this? That's first and foremost what I would be asking myself. Am I in a business that can be disintermediated, replaced, and is really not necessary for what I'm doing? As an end user and as an end consumer, I would start voting with my money and putting it towards these sort of new innovative ideas that are helping usher in this next era of technology, this next wave, and then also being a part of it and supporting it. And then also, once you understand it, help educate others around you, whether it's your family, your friends, etc. Then obviously, in some of these cases, there's opportunity to make an investment, as an end user. And once again, going back to voting with your dollars or cryptocurrencies or whatever you're putting forward. And also to get involved, help test this stuff out. But also understand that for the first time, we have the ability, what I believe, to really go and bring back the power of our own personal privacy. Because like you were saying, the centralization that is now existing in this dominance between Facebook, Google, your ISP, to have complete, unrestricted, unfiltered access into every single thing you do, we have the power to take that back and to return to where I believe it should be.
And Jared, let's just say, taking morals and ethics of your personal privacy and sovereignty aside, just practicality wise, Why is it important to have control over your private data?
Well, obviously, the number one thing is security, right? If you can control and encrypt your own private data, you don't have to worry about it getting compromised and breached and used against you. I've had my identity stolen a few times now. I'm constantly getting hacking attempts because of that. It's not fun.
And what happened when your identity was stolen? What did you have to do?
Well, I had somebody go to AT&T and sign up for a cell phone. And to this day, I still can't get them to cancel that account.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, it's that ridiculous. Like, I go to the website, then it says, well, call this number. Then I call this number, and it's like, well, you got to mail this packet in. It's just the shuffle game. And so it's like, why should they even have the ability to do that in the first place? I've never had an account with AT&T, never used them, never wanted to, yet somebody can come in, use my identity, and basically do this. So that's kind of the danger of the world we're living in today. And I've heard of much more horrific stories than this. People, the cost, if your identity is stolen and somebody goes and opens up a bunch of accounts, it can cost you a tremendous amount of time, energy, and money to correct that.
Yeah, and that's a great example, Jared. And sorry about the AT&T thing. I had a similar thing with Spotify, but it's also just like the frustration and time. And Jared, you're working on an amazing project with DigiByte, giving speeches at MIT and Harvard and all sorts of cool stuff, right? But the fact that you have to go through this time to say mail a packet, I think anyone that's ever been in bureaucratic hell, as I'll put it, which is all this paperwork and you're confused, they say they don't receive the documents. We've all been through it, right?
Well, credit agencies are a prime thing like that.
Yeah.
It's like I've been working to correct some stuff on my credit report.
Right.
I've literally had to go get notarized copies and mail it in there. And they still, it's to the point where you have to take them to court, right? Just to correct inaccuracies. It's like, that's another area of blockchain technology.
Guilty until proven innocent, right?
Like, we should have control of our own credit data. Like, that should not be.
Yeah.
It is literally held in the United States over your head. You can't get a job. You can't get a place to live. You can't do any of this stuff without getting their approval and then paying them for it. Like the Equifax breach, it was absolutely disgusting and nothing has happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really disgusting. And then there's also what looked like likely insider trading, but of course they found a way to justify it technically as not insider trading and no one went to jail. I mean, really disappointing. So I think you showed the danger of having your data out there. Jared, well, listen, you've done an amazing job. I want to finish off here. Tell users why you started DigiByte and what is DigiByte. And again, I'm just going to be annoying here and say layman's terms because you can obviously speak at a very technical level, but people that want to learn about DigiByte, tell us about your project.
So I first discovered Bitcoin in 2012. And I was obviously I was a software developer at the time. I was completely fascinated with it. So I started going through the source code. I started out as a Bitcoin miner, really started getting involved. And as I started going through some of the code, I was like, hey, I see this is a beautiful system, but I see where there's a chance for some improvements to be made. So in the fall of 2013, I forked. And when I say fork, I don't mean hard fork of the actual blockchain. I mean the source code on GitHub, on the website where the source code's kept. I forked it and started tweaking some things and testing some stuff. And one of the things that I felt was a problem was how long it took for the Bitcoin difficulty to adjust, which takes 2 weeks. And I don't want to get overly technical, but essentially with DigiByte, I felt, hey, I'll try this. It's an experiment. I didn't actually at the time think it would take off kind of how it has. So I just released it on the Bitcoin Talk forum. I'm like, hey, I got some new ideas, going to test this. What do you guys think? And so on January 10th, 2014, I released it. We had a countdown timer for like a week ahead so everybody could start mining basically. And, at the same time, release the open source code. And we put as the Genesis block for DigiByte, which for those that don't know what the Genesis block is, that's the very first block in the blockchain. When Satoshi launched Bitcoin, he used the news headline. I believe it was from, basically said, Chancellor Brinks on the point of failure. You can look it up. I can't remember verbatim exactly what it was, but that was basically the gist of it. Well, on January 10th, 2014, we used the headline from USA Today, Target 110 million customers' data stolen. So even going back to 2014, I knew that this technology can be used for cybersecurity to help prevent some of this stuff. So, we put it out there, we fixed some and improved some of the things on top of Bitcoin. And at the time, my idea was, well, if I can prove it works, maybe it'll be adopted and integrated into Bitcoin, some of these changes.
Wow.
And actually, since then, a lot of these changes have been implemented in everything from Zcash to Bitcoin Cash to dozens of other blockchains. in terms of like difficulty adjustment. So that's kind of been DigiByte's contribution. Since then, we went through a series of innovations and updates. We switched from 1 mining algorithm to 5 mining algorithms to help keep it further decentralized. We sped up block timing. So as it stands today, DigiByte is actually the longest public blockchain out there with over 6 million blocks. It's 40 times faster than Bitcoin. It's got 15-second blocks. And then it's also much more decentralized because you can mine it with both ASICs as well as GPUs. And it's much more resilient to a 51% attack.
Gotcha. And that 51% attack is just like, we'll say bad actors, and the majority of the miners take over the blockchain and cause double spends and stuff. So basically, you took the source codes of Bitcoin, saw some things that you thought could be improved it, and now it's taken off, not just as a testing ground for Bitcoin, but new features that are coming into its own for DigiByte. So let me ask you a question. If I go to a cafe in Austin that accepts DigiByte and I want to pay for a coffee, how long would the transaction take and how much would it cost?
So it would just take a few seconds. It would cost a fraction of a cent.
Wow.
And the merchant would be able to turn around and send those DigiBytes they received back to, let's say, their supplier or vendor within a couple minutes.
And Jared, I know that DigiByte has they're working on an identity thing for documents, which you mentioned notaries, and using blockchain to kind of disrupt notaries, which desperately needs to be disrupted. Talking to someone who's gone to many notaries in many countries in the world, where do you see DigiByte in 5 to 10 years?
Well, the main approach that we've tried to take is everybody seems to be focused on payments and trading and the currency, the money part. Yes, that's it's definitely a good use case, but there's so much obstruction and resistance by taking that path, right? When I sit down with whether it's a bank's compliance officer or a law firm's compliance officer, the first thing they throw at me is, oh, well, this can be used to buy drugs. This can be used to finance terrorism, yada, yada, yada. And so if you take that approach of trying to present to somebody, oh, it's currency, it's money. Okay, sure, it's very effective at it, right? It's probably one of the best use cases. But the psychological resistance, especially from those that are in authoritative positions, is just an uphill battle. Whereas if you go in and you sit down with these same people and you're like, so how do you feel about your data being breached when Equifax was hacked? How do you feel about your healthcare records being all over? How do you feel about your private browsing history being publicly or accessible to anyone who wants it, right?
Oh, man.
So if you go with that approach, you'd be like, technology can help fix these problems. But if you stifle it and you cut it off right now, you're hurting everybody, including yourself. So I've found that taking that cybersecurity approach is way more effective at getting in the door and getting people's attention and changing people's perspective on this technology and kind of shifting the discussion. So where I see DigiByte, the applications that we're building, some of the stuff, I can't talk about right now, but really cool stuff is leveraging those aspects of the blockchain, the security element, to integrate into applications that you'll use that you won't even know that that's what's being done, but you'll know, hey, okay, it says powered by DigiByte, but this makes my life better. This makes my life more secure. That's kind of the vision, and that's the idea and the approach that we're taking with DigiByte.
Wow. Very exciting stuff, man. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. I want to have you back, Jared, and especially when your book comes out, whenever it's published, why don't you come back on and talk about the book? I can't think of a better podcast than Blockchain 2025. To talk about Blockchain 2035. Yeah. I know everyone listening enjoyed this episode. I know you're very humble, but your knowledge of blockchain and cybersecurity is really valuable. And thanks again for really painting real world pictures and keeping it in layman's terms. I'm sure a couple of people wrote the UTXOs, but it's complicated stuff. It's a pleasure, and I hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit Bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.